Well, good evening and welcome to this first in Australian politics. Labor candidates debating each other in public for the chance to become the candidate to contest the Sydney City Council elections. Now, normally the major parties choose their candidates amongst themselves, but facing a dwindling membership base and criticism that too many Labor MPs come from the same, mostly union background, Labor is launching an experiment. It's a US-style primary pre-selection process, opening up the process to non-party members of the community, to have a say on who the Labor candidate should be. It's hoped that that will give the community a bit more involvement and a bit more ownership over the candidate and broaden the sorts of candidates that Labor brings into not just the council but eventually into the state and federal parliaments as well. Now, we have 5 Labor candidates vying for the pre-selection. One of them was unable to join us tonight at the last minute. He's quite unwell, Jonathan Yee, so he couldn't be here. But let's introduce Linda Scott. She is a refugee advocate. David Speers, a lawyer and former policy advisor. Cassandra Wilkinson, an author and commentator. And also joining us actually from Perth is Cameron Murphy. He's the president of the New South Wales Council of Civil Liberties. He's in Perth on business, though, so unable to join us in the studio. Let's kick off by going around and posing the opening question. Why do you want to be Lord Mayor of Sydney? Linda, first to you.
Thanks, David. I think that at this time, when I talk to my neighbours and friends, they tell me that they're pretty dissatisfied with Labor. And I think that we need a strong community candidate with a record of activism on issues in the inner city of Sydney that people care about to run. And I think that I'm that candidate. I've been the chair of the Surrey Hills Neighbourhood Centre and campaigned on lots of local issues. I've obviously got a history of running on national issues as co-convener of Labor for Refugees, but I really think we need to focus on local government and the local issues for this campaign.
All right, Damien, what's your case for being Lord Mayor?
David, I'm the pro-bike candidate, I'm the pro-arts candidate, and I'm the pro-small bars candidate. I'm also the candidate who has a track record of delivering law reform for the gay and lesbian community. Those are the main policy issues that I think Labor should be running on to deliver a Lord Mayorship, a Labor Lord Mayorship. And they're also the policies that I believe need to be guiding the City of Sydney for the future. All right, Cassandra Wilkinson?
Well, I'm running not on any of those issues. If you want to go arts for arts, I'm a writer. I co-founded a radio station in Sydney, which is $1 million a year business that runs on privately raised money. I am a member of a start-up company that does social impact investing. I come from both a business and a community and government background. And while I'm concerned about community and creative issues, the one and only problem really facing the City of Sydney is that there aren't enough places for people to live. There's been a 40% decline in the amount of housing built. That's led to rising prices. And frankly, in simple terms, the rent is too damn high because the houses are too damn low, and unless we get density, all of the lower income people will be forced out of the city.
All right, well, some interesting issues to get into there. Let's bring in Cameron Murphy. From Perth, I was mentioning that he's unable to be with us in the studio. He's there in Perth on business. But Cameron, the opening question to you, why do you want to be Lord Mayor of Sydney?
Well, David, sorry I couldn't be there in the studio, first of all. I want to be Lord Mayor of Sydney because I think that the city is going to change over the next 15 or 20 years. We're talking about a city where Greater Sydney is going to have almost 1 million new people who move into it. The City of Sydney itself will have a large proportion of those people, and I'm someone who's spent my whole career standing up for ordinary people against powerful interest groups. And I think that I'm well placed to lead the city to make sure that community people and residents get their slice of the pie as the city grows over the next decade.
All right, well, let's get into the issue that a couple of you have raised there, and that is this population one. And Cameron, let's go back to you on this. If we are going to see 1 million more people over the coming couple of decades filling up the City of Sydney, where are they going to go? What's the answer to this?
Well, I think it's an opportunity for us to shape development. Development in the city is inevitable. There's going to be more congestion. There are going to be more people living there. What we can do is play a role in the way that occurs and make sure the traditional Labor values of fairness and equality are brought forth in the equation. David, I think that's something that's been wrong with the Labor Party for a long time, where certainly for the last decade it's been seen to be too close to vested interest groups. I'm someone that's completely different to that. I'm someone who spent most of the last decade arguing against poor decisions, standing up for matters of principle, and they're the sort of skills that I can bring to the equation in making sure that ordinary people's interests are fairly represented.
What vested interests has Labor been too close to in the past, in particular in this context of development?
Oh, well, look, there have been terrible stories on the news that you would have seen. Even now, people see that the Labor Party's got too many faceless people in back rooms. What this process is about is an honest one. It's about changing those perceptions and also changing the reality.
No, but just getting back to this issue of development in the city and how you accommodate this population growth, what are you saying actually needs to change in the way Labor approaches this?
Well, what Labor needs to do is make sure that those traditional values of fairness and equality are represented. I mean, I think the Labor Party can do great things in terms of ensuring the development and the changes that occur in terms of communities, the impact is minimised. We have fair and equitable outcomes. The city is going to grow. There are going to be more and more apartment buildings that go in. It's going to be tighter in terms of community use. What Labor's role is to make sure that those community values are fairly represented.
All right.
What we don't want is the big end of town dominating, getting their interests looked after at the expense of residents. And I think there are a lot of people out there who want a Labor position about fairness and equality represented.
So, OK, Linda, let's throw that to you then. Population growth, but in a Labor way. Do you have any different sort of approach to that?
I think that a huge increase in the demographic in the inner city is children. I've got two very young boys, and one of the things I notice when I speak to my friends and neighbours is that a lot of the demands for services, for things like childcare, are really under pressure in the city. And I think that families are choosing to stay in the city and have their children and raise them there. One of the things that council needs to do is shift back to its traditional role of offering some of those really important services like childcare. I've got a person I spoke to during the week who's had their child on a waiting list for 2 years. We've got a wealthy City of Sydney council that is spending, in some areas like subsidising promotion of the bike paths at $7,000 a day. Why are we doing this when we could be investing in the services that the people in the inner city actually need?
So that'd be a priority for you, making sure there's adequate childcare to go with that population growth. Damien, what is the answer to this population growth?
Look, one of the great things about living in the City of Sydney, I think, is that at the same time as it is one of the wealthiest local government areas probably in Australia and produces a 1/12 of the national GDP, it's also a place where there are strong traditional working class communities, and there are also many underprivileged and marginalised groups. When we see huge increases in the population like this, we want to make sure that there are social justice issues taken into account. We don't want those communities who are not at the big end of town forced out, and that's why council needs to be doing taking a much stronger role in affordable housing, making sure that there is accommodation for all those different groups and communities.
Cassandra, do you have any dispute with what's been said on this issue?
Yeah, I do. One of the reasons that I'm running is because I'm sick to death of speeches about justice, equity, children, the future and Labor values that don't specify how you're going to solve the problem. There is no other way to reduce the pressure on prices in the city than to build more housing, and there is no other way to build more housing than to build it up. And the development that I don't want to see is what happened at Fraser's in the city, where the original developer went bankrupt waiting for the council to make up its mind. Then the government had to get involved. At the end of it, we have $700,000 two-bedroom flats.
So you'd be happier to see more high-rise apartment development?
Absolutely, yes, I would.
And does anyone have a problem with that?
I really do. I think that the CUB site is a great example, Kaz, because the community campaigned really hard to make sure that that was a quality development. And we don't ever want to
developer broke.
We don't ever want to sacrifice quality. We don't want to have people living in apartments that have absolutely no light, that have absolutely no design or green features. That is just the wrong way to build and develop a city. I think that we need to have important design and development principles that make sure that we still all love living in the city of Sydney.
Then one of the things I'd like to say what they are.
Yeah, look, one of the things I'd like to do is to introduce a community developer accord. This is an idea where at the very start of the process, the community can have a say in what the principles of development are in their area and about specific big developments.
Is that going to mean more red tape for a developer?
It is not more red tape, because what it will result in is a negotiation that will save money in the long term.
All right. Cameron Murphy, what do you think about that?
Yeah, David, look, I don't think the two things are incompatible. What we need to do is ensure that there is a focus on different types of housing. I mean, the council should be doing more, for example, to provide housing for homeless people. It should be doing more to provide housing for workers, and it should be doing more to provide low-cost housing. The council has almost $1 billion in the bank. There's no reason why council can't be directly involved in some of these things.
Damien, what...
I don't think it's a matter of red tape, but the council has land. It ought to be producing solutions by investing in development. There are models in New York that are fantastic, where they've taken areas that are a little bit run down. The city has built apartment blocks there that have good design, that are done without problems of red tape. In some cases, they're partnerships with the private sector, and they run services where, for example, you have a mix of housing. Some of the apartments are sold by the city in New York. Others are provided at fixed rents, so workers can afford to rent and live in them and ultimately purchase them from the city. And they have space for facilities where they can house homeless people, and they can do things like put a doctor in there once a week, put a dentist in once a fortnight, and make sure that social services are dealt with. And there's some of the positive things that I think the council could be doing, but isn't at the moment.
Look, I want to agree. I want to back up Linda on this point. Affordable housing experts say that there are a range of policy levers that can be used to generate affordable housing in the city. Reducing requirements and red tape on developers for development applications is one of them, but it doesn't really work where there are, in areas like the City of Sydney, where there is huge demand for housing. It works where if you take off some of those requirements, then the market forces will even up. There's always going to be huge demand for people to move into the city, so there will always be upwards pressure on the prices. But what you need to be doing is using alternative forms. So there are. I've had a look at the list of properties that the City of Sydney owns. It owns hundreds and hundreds of properties in the area. It needs to look at those properties and work out whether some of them can be developed in partnership with some of the affordable housing NGOs for residential and for affordable housing and for social housing and for key worker housing.
I want to move on from housing. I'll just give you, Cassandra, a quick final word on this before we get to the next issue.
Yeah, my quick final word on that is that 100 half-empty council properties won't house 1 million people. There have to be market-based solutions.
All right. One of the issues that does come up regularly from residents and others who visit the City of Sydney is this issue of alcohol-fuelled violence. We've seen it a big problem in Melbourne and in Sydney as well. Linda, first to you on this. Do you see this as a big problem? What can be done about it? Is opening and closing hours an issue?
It is an issue. I've campaigned in Surrey Hills around this issue. I previously used to work for the state government researching alcohol and crime, so it's a real interest of mine. We know that the two biggest predictors of alcohol-related violence are late trading hours and density. And at the moment in the city, we've got a lot of alcohol venues in the one place and a lot of them open all hours. Mm-hmm. I think that we all like to go out for a drink. That's a fantastic thing to do in the city. But we don't need all our venues open 24 hours in the one area. I think we need to spread them across the city to make sure that people can have an enjoyable experience without getting beaten up as they walk out the front door.
Cassandra?
I couldn't disagree more. I have an interest in a venue in the Cross. FBI Radio, my station, we have Australian music venue in the Cross. It's a fantastic venue. We're in a 24-hour licensed hotel. It's a fantastic hotel. The proportion of violence that is related to King's Cross and alcohol premises is a fraction of the total assault rate. I've been drinking in the Cross and in Oxford Street for more than 2 decades. It's a problem of policing at the street level. Shutting down the venues at 6 p.m, at a 6 o'clock swill, or at midnight, or at 3 a.m. won't change it.
What do you think about that, Damien?
I think what we really need is a change in the drinking culture in Sydney, and you're not going to get that by continually opening up big beer barns where people just go to get outrageously intoxicated. What we need, there's been some movement towards a small bar drinking culture. But that they've been stymied by delays in the City of Sydney approval process. So what I think we should be doing is remove those delays, unfreeze the liquor licensing applications for King's Cross for small bars, and try to encourage a different type of nightlife in Sydney.
Cameron Murphy, do you think that the streets are safe enough, and what would you do about it?
David, I live in King's Cross. I've lived there for the last 15 years. And I walk home on Friday night, Saturday night, after I've been out to dinner at a friend's place, and I walk through King's Cross on Darlinghurst Road, and you have to acknowledge there's a problem. You see assaults all the time, individuals fighting, people sparring with police, and there's obviously a problem there. Now, it's not a problem that's reflective of the culture all over the city, but there are alcohol hotspots where you have to acknowledge there's an issue there. And look, it's a complex problem to solve. The federal government, as we know, taxes alcohol and deals with its importation. The state government deals with licensing of premises, and the council deals with issues like opening hours. It deals with occupancy. One practical thing I think the council can do immediately about it is compliance. I had a look, and the council have a handful of compliance officers. Last time I looked, it was under 10. I understand those officers work as individuals, and you're expecting an individual compliance officer to turn up to a large establishment in King's Cross, owned by a colourful Sydney identity, to navigate their way past 20 or 30 bouncers and then enforce compliance. And
so how many would you have?
Would you have too many people?
Would you have squads of them?
Look, I do a couple of things, which is, one, I'd employ more compliance officers. The second thing I'd do is have the compliance officers working in teams. So there'd be 2 or 3 of them. And I think if there was proper compliance around trading hours, after all, people go through a process where the community has its say on the opening hours of an establishment that serves alcohol. The very least the council should be doing is enforcing it.
All right,
Cassandra, that might take some of the heat out of the issue.
I can see you shaking your head at that one.
Look at the Alco-Pops tax. Knee-jerk reactions to public panic campaigns around alcohol gave us the tax on Midori spring water drinks, and it's done nothing. The results released last week showed that the Alco-Pops tax made no difference to drinking patterns at all.
But what about this idea that a compliance officer shouldn't be just on their own, going into a club in the middle of the night?
This description of the pubs as being run by shady crooks with armies of bouncers, I mean, I don't know how often you guys go out to clubs anymore, but that is not what it's like there. The pubs that I go to, whether I'm up the Cross or on Oxford Street, are just not like that. We are overestimating the size of this problem to score political points off each other.
Yeah, Cassandra, I had a friend who was beaten very badly and ended up in significant rehab for 6 months after his beating in the Cross because of alcohol-related violence.
One
this is a
anecdote is not a basis for public policy, no matter how sad it is.
You don't think there's a problem at all?
I think there's a street-level policing problem in King's Cross. I think blaming the venues and having an army of compliance officers out there will make no difference, or let's say it'll make as much difference as the Alco-Pops tax.
All right.
And look, David, I agree with Cassandra in that I think you do need more policing. It's just wholly inadequate if you walk around King's Cross at night. But what we're dealing with here is what council can do, and council ought to be working with the state government, with the federal government, to look at solutions to the larger problem. I think, though, that compliance officers are one practical solution and one that council's got complete control over. and it can take a lot of heat out of the issue if it's done well.
Let's turn now to transport. Damien, you said you're the pro-bike candidate in this race. I take it you're a fan of the bikeways that Clover Moore, the current Lord Mayor, has put in place. Would you be talking about extending those?
Yeah, well, look, I certainly think we should build them, we should complete them. There's a plan that I think they should be finally completed by 2017. I'd like that to be done as quickly as possible. I think they're a really important part of an infrastructure for the city for the future. We need to provide multiple modes of transport for people to get around.
What about the criticism that they're barely used and they clog up traffic?
Look, I think that they were put in place by the current administration in a very hasty manner. There were only, I think, 80 consultation between the city and the community, and I think there are some problems with them around the place. But I think that they can be. What we need to be doing is ensuring there's a greater culture of awareness by both cyclists, pedestrians, and motorists of each other, and looking at how that can be developed in the future. And I also think that the other thing that I think we need to be doing is introducing a bike sharing scheme along the lines of the Velib and the Boris bikes in London and now in New York, whereby people can hire a bike for short trips and it's convenient when they go to the city.
That's been tried in Brisbane with very little take-up, actually.
That's because of helmets. The reason that Veolia and other companies who run these schemes in Paris and London can't do it in Sydney, although they've tried, is because of mandatory helmet laws. We've got to get rid of the helmet laws. Yes,
you should be allowed to ride a bike without
Absolutely.
a helmet.
And at the very least, for short trips, there should be, I certainly would be lobbying the Labor Party MPs in state parliament to introduce reforms to those laws.
But in the city of Sydney, you're often riding past some pretty big buses, traffic hurtling along some pretty dangerous roads.
Not on a separated cycleway. As long as you have a separated cycleway, you don't need a helmet.
Okay.
And people are adults and have the ability to decide whether to wear helmets or not.
Okay.
I think the critical issue about the cycleways is this, David. They are good things in principle, but they were designed really badly in many areas. For example, there was a proposal at one point to put the cycleway across the mouth of one of the hospital emergency departments. There is a total lack of consultation when the city decides to undertake these big projects. And then they have to defend themselves and, as I said before, spend up to $7,000 a day promoting this error that they have made. I spoke to some drivers the other morning in Erskineville who were telling me that they often run the risk of injuring people because it is an incredibly dangerous system that hasn't been well thought through.
So you don't think it should be extended? Are you saying it should be wound back?
I support the cycleways. We use them. I use them with my kids. But I think really we have to put a lot more effort into designing them to make sure that they're safe and better for the community so that people will actually use them.
Cameron Murphy, are you a pro or anti the
look,
bike
David,
culture?
I've spoken to many residents and frankly everybody inherently thinks cycleways are a good idea. I just can't believe that this issue has become the distraction that it has. It should have been done in a simple manner where if it consulted the community properly, and by that I mean residents and businesses. There are a lot of businesses in the city that are adversely affected by the way cycleways have been put in, where they are. Also, removal of parking spaces without providing alternatives. And I think it could have been done in a positive manner where it was embraced by everyone. All the residents I speak to like them. They use them, they think they're good, but they think all of these other issues should have been managed more effectively.
Now, what about? I want to ask you all about another transport issue, that of light rail, with the monorail going or gone. Cameron, first to you. What do you see as the future for light rail in the city?
Oh, well, look, I think there's got to be a system that provides good transport around the city, and the council's investing a lot of money pushing issues like light rail that frankly it doesn't have any direct control over. What I'd like to see is the council working more closely with state government to make sure that there are solutions. I mean, one of the problems that's been raised with me continually by residents, particularly in the southern area of the council, suburbs like Alexandria, Rosebery and Erskineville, is that the council is refusing to allow parking spaces in development, There are enormous pressures on parking. Most of those residents do the right thing and they walk to work or they walk to a train station and take public transport, but they still need a car because there's a gap between what they're expected to do in using public transport and what's actually there.
So more parking
and I think
stations
the sooner
is what
we
you're saying.
have, well, I just think we need a proper system to manage the transition. Ultimately, the city is going to be more congested. It's going to be harder and harder to drive cars and to park them. Everyone accepts that. But what we need is a solution to manage that transition, and we need to bring on public transport alternatives like light rail and make it happen and make it happen quickly.
We are running out of time, but Damien, what do you think about light rail?
Look, I think it's important. I think the council should work with the state government about it. But I think there are other, like the council is spending millions of dollars on this for something that is not in its bailiwick. It should look at there are other transport issues in the local government area. South Sydney is badly served by public transport, and the council should be working with the state government on that. And also the transport that the City of Sydney provides itself, its community buses for elderly and less mobile people, only go between the villages in the city, and no one really knows about them. That needs to be improved, and there needs to be routes between different parts of the city and the CBD.
Cassandra, what should be the priorities when it comes to this transport issue?
Look, people have got to be clear. The council doesn't have that much money. It has a fraction of any state government department's budget. It doesn't control the transport corridors or the transport budgets. What it does control is a lot of rules. The council can't build housing, it can't build transport, but it does control the development rules. And what council needs to do is work out how many rules it can remove in order to let private industry and the state government get on with providing the infrastructure we need.
Linda?
Look, light rail is one in many public transport options that we should try to embrace, but as Cass says, council only has so much control. I spoke to a woman the other day in Alexandria who told me that she had to have a car to get her family around, but that she had spoken to council about a neighbouring development and the impact it would have on her parking, and was told by council that she should move out of the city. She was told that she should move out of the city if she wanted to continue to have a car. This is completely unacceptable, and, in the south of the electorate, where there are many people who have families who try not to drive, I walk to work, but, we still have to have a car to do a limited number of trips. These things are really important to people, and we can't just say in the future we'll improve public transport, but at the moment we're going to totally remove your parking.
Now, we are nearly out of time, so I'll just very quickly and finally go around and ask you all about, if you do become Lord Mayor, what will you do to improve the respect and reputation of local politics, and in particular things like connections with developments, fundraising, full disclosure of these sorts of things. Linda, first to you.
Well, I'm starting in this campaign, David, by taking a very drastic line on this, and that is that in spite of rules that allow for all of the candidates to raise tens of thousands of dollars, I'm not accepting financial donations for my campaign.
None at all?
No, I think that it's important that in a community pre-selection process, this first one, if people share my vision, then they will come on board, they will volunteer their time to door knock and phone call others with me.
And if you are selected as the Labor candidate, will you then accept donations?
I think that we need to move right away from this old Labor model of accepting big donations from people. We need to have a community force behind our candidate, and this is part of the reason for me why I'm running. So I think that we need to ask the people for their time and for their belief and for their support in that manner, and it's about returning transparency and accountability to Labor politics, and that's what I'm trying to do.
Damien?
I too am not accepting donations in my campaign. I think that these campaigns should be run from the grassroots, and I don't see why there needs to be a lot of money involved in them. I think Labor's strength in South Sydney and in the City of Sydney in general is its connection to communities, and it's those that we need to be developing, not relationships with big construction companies.
Okay. Cassandra?
Look, there's only one way to restore faith in politics, and that's to do what you say. You have to be absolutely rock solid. You can't talk about children and justice. You can't have a war of anecdotes and heartwarming stories. You have to be clear about what you're going to do, stick to your principles and deliver. And if you deliver, people will see it and they'll know that you're fair dinkum.
Of course, there's a lot of distrust in politicians generally at the moment over this broken promises issue. So what sort of guarantee can you give?
I give my guarantee that I will do every single thing I say that I will do, and I have got a list of all the things that I want to do on my website. I'm being clear and specific on housing, transport, facilities, activities. Everything I want to do is on the record, and if I don't do even one of those things, I hope I'll get fired.
Final word, Cameron Murphy.
Well, David, look, I'm someone who for the last 10 years at the Council for Civil Liberties has stood up for ordinary people against powerful vested interest groups. There's a clear record there of what I've done. I've always stood up to people who I think are wrong. Labor governments, as well as Liberal governments, over issues like Tampa, anti-terrorism laws that were excessive, even things like privacy and surveillance. And look, that's the record I stand on, that people can vote for somebody who's principled, that they can trust. In terms of the donations issue, I just think, frankly, it's unrealistic to say that in this day and age you can run a political campaign without accepting donations at all. Donations come in many forms. It can be monetary, it can be donations in kind and people volunteering. In this campaign, I'm running a campaign where I'm accepting donations. I'm doing so Obama style, where I'm encouraging a lot of people to give small amounts of money. There are people who can't do volunteer work but do want to be part of the process, do want to assist, and they're making donations of $5, $10.
Okay.
And I think that needs to be distinguished from the sort of situation where you have large developers giving tens of thousands of dollars, or being part of leadership groups or forums where they're paying political parties $50,000 a plate for lunch or dinner.
Okay.
That's what we've got to end, but I don't have a problem at all with community, grassroots campaigning where people contribute small amounts and lots of people do so.
We are going to have to wrap things up there. They say all politics is local, and that's exactly what this contest is all about, opening it up to the community to have a look at all of these candidates and make their decision. We thank you all for taking part. Cameron Murphy, Linda Scott, Damien Spruce and Cassandra Wilkinson. Good luck with this election contest. And thank you for your company as well. I'm David Speers. Bye for now.